I love Rosh Hashanah. I love apples and honey, freshly baked, sweet, round challah. I love the timeless music that reminds me of high holy days gone by. I love seeing everyone here together. And I love the shofar. The shofar service is my favorite part of Rosh Hashanah. The haunting, primal, tribal sounds are stirring, timeless, linking us to past generations of Jews. The shofar is actually the only commandment in the Torah associated with Rosh Hashanah. But what exactly is the commandment? To blow the shofar? No. The commandment is to listen to the shofar. The only Torah commandment to be performed on Rosh Hashanah is not about prayer or sin or repentance. It's about listening. Listening is a disappearing art these days. We unfriend people on Facebook who post things we don't agree with. We change the channel when an anchor or a pundit we disagree with is on. Maybe Henry Higgins was right in My Fair Lady when he advised to stick to the weather and your health. But come to think of it, with climate change and the anti-vaccine movement, even that isn't safe. Every conversation has the potential to become an argument. Compromise seems impossible because we've mostly stopped listening to each other. It's easy to sit and point the finger at our political opposites for not listening, but it's a lot harder to point the finger at ourselves and realize that we too don't listen. And our deafness extends far beyond politics. When we have a device in our hands, we're not really listening. When we feel obligated, we're not really listening. When we make it about us, we're not really listening. When we rush to solve, to fix, to give advice, we're not really listening. When we interrupt, we're not really listening. When we care more about talking, we're not really listening. Consider the teenager who complained to his high school counselor. You know what I am? I'm a comma. When I talk to my dad, he listens for a minute, then he starts talking. When I try to talk, he interrupts. Well, not always. But even when he doesn't interrupt, he doesn't listen to me either. As soon as I'm finished, he starts right back in where he left off. He makes me a comma. It's as if I didn't say anything. You might say that rabbis talk for a living. After all, here we are, Rosh Hashanah, the sanctuary is filled, and I'm up here talking. But I would argue the more important thing a rabbi does is listen. The big sermons come once or twice a year, but day in, day out, I'm lucky. All of your rabbis and cantors are. To have you come to us, confide in us, and we listen. I thought I was pretty good at it. I was wrong. Some of you know that I fractured my jaw this summer. In order for it to heal, my mouth was wired shut for 6 weeks. The effort and discomfort of trying to talk was so frustrating that I finally succumbed to my temporary reality and stopped trying. A funny thing happened. I noticed that because I could not speak, I wasn't thinking about my reply. So I was free to be present, to listen, to really listen. And I realized how often in the past I thought I was listening when I really wasn't. As Stephen Covey puts it, most of us don't listen with the intent to understand. We listen with the intent to reply. Look up. Stenciled around the oculus of this magnificent dome is the most important, most central imperative in all of Judaism, the Shema. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Listen, Israel. Adonai is our God. Adonai is one. It does not say, speak, Israel. Proclaim that Adonai is our God. Adonai is one. It commands us to listen. In the most important commandment Jews have, we are commanded to listen. Not to talk. In his famous book, Blink, Malcolm Gladwell reveals the surprising fact that the risk of being sued for medical malpractice has very little to do with how many mistakes a doctor makes. Analysis of malpractice lawsuits show that there are highly skilled doctors who get sued a lot, and doctors who make lots of mistakes and never get sued. In other words, patients don't file lawsuits because they've been harmed by shoddy medical care. Patients file lawsuits because they've been harmed by shoddy medical care and something else happens to them. What's that something else? It's whether or not their doctor took an extra 3 minutes and listened to them. That's the only difference between the doctors who got sued and the doctors who didn't. The outcomes were irrelevant. At the end of the day, we all want to be listened to. This morning, the Torah reminds us of the damage not listening can cause. After all, Abraham nearly kills his son because he was not listening. Most of us remember that God instructs Abraham to take Isaac, his son, up to the mountain and sacrifice him. But according to the Midrash, that's not what God said. The rabbis suggest that Abraham misunderstood the Hebrew word olah, which literally means bring up, and instead took it to mean an olah offering, a sacrifice. Rashi, the greatest biblical commentator of all time, says that God simply told Abraham to bring Isaac up to the mountain. God did not say to sacrifice him. Abraham wasn't really listening when God spoke to him, and he sacrificed his son because of it. You heard me right. He sacrificed his son. In a way, Abraham did sacrifice Isaac. He may not have killed him, but he murdered their relationship. Following this terrible tragedy, Abraham and Isaac never speak to one another again. Abraham loses his son because he was not listening. It took exhaustion for me to really listen. Mark Peters shares in his account of his wife's illness. One afternoon, my wife, Gina, asked me, "Mark, if I kill myself, will you promise me that you will find a new wife so that you can still be happy?" I sighed and leaned back into the chair next to her, unsure of what to say. Actually, that's not entirely true. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I had been saying it for 8 months. It's just that at that moment, I was so tired from work, tired from worry, tired from so many conversations about suicide that I didn't have the energy for it again. So I sat in silence. My wife had been hospitalized 8 months previously with a psychotic break, Mark continues. It was terrifying. I took a few months off work so that she wouldn't be alone. When she brought up suicide, I panicked. I treated her feelings like a fire, and I was the extinguisher. I had to act quickly. Otherwise, the warning sparks could grow. Her first fixation was on overdosing on her medication, so I concocted a plan to hide the pills. Then her focus shifted to the Golden Gate Bridge. She wanted to drive there and jump. She told me about this over and over again. I couldn't hide a bridge. She told me these things when we were walking on the beach together or at home cooking dinner, but I was so afraid that I responded in full emergency mode, as if we were up on the bridge. I couldn't not see it that way. Someone I loved was in pain, and I needed to do something about it. But on that afternoon, exhaustion had beaten me down into shutting up. I sat quietly and just held her hand. She looked at me in surprise. Cautiously, she ventured with another thought. "I hate myself so much," she said. I said nothing. I wish I had never been born. More silence. She continued through her tortured feelings. I listened and hated what I heard, but I knew that at this moment, she could not act on her pain. We weren't actually up there on the bridge. We were at home, together, and she was safe. These were just words. And then she stunned me. "Thank you for listening to me," she said, pulling my hands to her lips and giving them a soft kiss. "It's so nice to talk to you. I feel so much better." I hadn't said a word. It dawned on me how little I had been listening to her, without judgment or rush to action. She didn't need me to tell her everything was going to be okay. That didn't help. She needed me to hear her pain. Being heard somehow made it more manageable. On that afternoon, I finally learned that when someone we love is in pain, the greatest gift we can give is to listen patiently, purely, Thankfully, most of us will never have to wrestle with a suicidal loved one. But the people we loved do have dark days. And like Abraham, we all sacrifice so much when we don't listen. We sacrifice civility when we don't listen. We sacrifice community when we don't listen. We sacrifice intimacy with the people we love most when we don't listen. Most of all, we sacrifice what makes life most worth living. Our friendships, our marriages, our parents, our children, our families. We sacrifice them all when we don't listen. The shofar is calling on us to listen, because listening makes teshuvah possible. The only way that we can repair, can change our relationships for the better, is to listen. Really listen to the people in our lives and seek to understand their feelings, their pain, their joy, their worries, their happiness, their needs, their longings, their fears, their hopes, and their dreams. That is the work of these next 10 days and every day thereafter. Throughout the High Holy Day prayer book, we sing Shema Kolenu, pleading with God, begging God to listen to us. How can we ask God to do that which we are unwilling to do for those we love most? I wouldn't wish a jaw fracture on anyone, but I did learn a lot. I learned that I wasn't as good a listener as I thought I was. And I learned how to be a better listener. But most of all, I learned to talk less. The ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes noted that we have one tongue and two ears, so that we might talk less and listen more. That was true 2,500 years ago, and it's just as true today. So in this new year, let's listen more. Let's listen more to our colleagues and coworkers, to our friends and neighbors. Let's listen more to our husbands and wives. Let's listen more to our parents and children. Let's listen more.